lesson 13. We're going to continue our discussion on love. Do I have a volunteer, or maybe two volunteers, depending on how much you want to read? There's about 2 paragraphs here. We'll include that little phrase at the bottom of the first page of lesson 13 on that second paragraph. But do I have a volunteer to read those for me? Go ahead, Addie. Thank you.
After the end of the Cold War, doctors in the U.S. went to witness the birth process in the former Soviet Union. In a typical Russian procedure, the mother was put into the hospital for a week to 10 days. During this time, the husband wasn't allowed to see his wife or newborn child, except for briefly daily visits. During the birth process, the mother was heavily sedated so that she remembered little or nothing of the birth, and the baby wasn't brought to her until 2 or 3 days after the birth. I'll keep reading.
Okay, that's fine.
The U.S. doctors were then given the opportunity to demonstrate their procedure. They did not heavily sedate the woman. The father was present, and the baby was placed in the mother's arms within moments of birth. The joy of the mother as she held her new baby brought tears to the eyes of the Russian doctors. They had never seen the immediate bonding that took place. This bond of love between father and mother and their newborn child is precious and God-given. God wants more than a man, woman, and their children simply sharing the same living quarters. He wants them to be bound together as a family by love. As the Church of the Lord, we are the spiritual family of God. Our bond of love is precious and God-given as well.
Alrighty, thank you, Addie. That was crazy to me. The way that the Soviet Union did their birth process was. Is that crazy to everybody else as much as it was crazy to me? What's wrong with that? As it kind of explained in this passage that Addie read, but in your mind, what does that take away?
Well, I think what stood out to me a lot was that the baby wasn't given to her till like 3 days later.
Yeah.
Like that was just unbelievable to me, honestly.
Yeah, my question is, what's the purpose of that? Like, why do that? How, to the mothers in here who have experienced this, because I've not, obviously. But I bet someday I'll be a father in the room, hopefully, Lord willing, and that will be a great experience. But for the mothers and fathers in this room, how special is it to hold your baby for the first time after birth?
It's huge.
And why is that?
Because, I mean, you do develop this immediate bond with this little human being who you've helped to bring into the world, and it's an amazing feeling, amazing thinking about that. I can only imagine what that must be like for a mother who has carried the baby for 9 months, and finally has the baby and can look at the baby and hold the baby and all of those things. I can only imagine what that must be like for her, from her perspective. But as a father, it's an amazing feeling to get to see and to hold your child for the first time. I mean, it brings a husband and wife together in ways that were, I don't know, impossible before, because there's just this new bond and tie that exists between the two of you that, yes, has existed for 9 months, but the tangibility of the gift is so much more real and vivid, and it does things that the thought of it cannot produce on its own.
Yeah. That's awesome. Are there any mothers in here who want to share that experience on what feelings were you going through once you were given your baby? And really, if you want to go back to the first time you had a child, what does that feel? What is that feeling, and how can you describe it? Angie?
I'm going to go a little different.
Okay.
I just became a grandma.
Okay.
I'm
Yes,
an
you did.
adopted child, and we had to wait for 2 days before we got to see him.
Yeah.
That was excruciating.
Yeah.
Just sitting there not being able to have those moments.
Yeah.
But as soon as he was put into my arms, it's just this overwhelming feeling.
Yeah.
You just cannot describe it.
Yeah.
And it's all about the love and the bonding.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I'm sure that you already knew what that felt like, but even for Liz and Josh, I'm sure that anxiety and the nerves going into that was just like, I have to wait. Why can't I just have it now? So that's a cool experience.
Hey, Zach.
Yeah.
I didn't hear everything that she said. I was doing something for Greg. But when we were there, there was a period of time that we had to wait. And the baby was born at the hospital. We were waiting to get the call, you can come
Right.
see him, get him. And it was probably 18 to 30 hours. I don't remember the exact time. But there was some anxiety. Okay, what's going on? Because you don't know.
Yeah.
So I couldn't imagine if that was, as a mom, if that was your baby that you didn't get to see immediately. And you think about the women that have premature births, that the baby has to go to the NICU and spend significant time away. I've got a friend in the HVAC world that had that happen, and she didn't get a hold her baby for like 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And when you talk to her about it, she said it is a traumatic experience to be apart from, because you desire that bond.
Yeah, I can't imagine that either. I will say Angie said almost exactly what you just said there at the beginning.
Blame Greg.
But yeah, that last part, I mean, once again, I've never experienced it before, but in my mind I can understand that can't be a fun experience. To have this child and then all of a sudden you have to wait to be able to have it. So I will ask then, how does this relate to God and His children? Can we relate it to God and His children? Andrew?
We can, and I think to offer, you asked why would the doctors in that time have done that?
Yeah.
And there is a explanation for why they would have done that, and we used to do it in this country too.
Okay.
And as more and more was learned about health, the concern was, well, let's make this as clinically safe, as healthy and clean and sterile a process as we can. So there probably was that as the motivation, but in the process of making it so sterile, it lost the human element of being born.
Okay.
It became a very overly sterile and overly clean process. And if we want to turn that into an application as far as God's people, sometimes in loving someone, it becomes far too sterile of a process. It becomes far too clean. It needs to be neat. It needs to be pretty. And as soon as it looks ugly, and as soon as it doesn't feel well put together and pre-planned and pretty, then we want to get it out of our sight. And that's not how love needs to work. So I think the lesson that this example was trying to teach us is that you've got to not lose the human element, and the human element is not always the clean and the sterile method.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Zach, I think everybody focuses on the feelings of the mother, and that's absolutely true. It's been so many years since I first held this tiny baby who
Yeah.
weighed 5 pounds
Yeah.
and half an ounce. But I can still remember that feeling. But also think about the trauma for the baby.
Right.
The baby has been in this warm, comfortable place all this time, and all of a sudden, he's out in the world without the comfort
Yeah.
of that mother whose voice he knows.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So I think that is an additional thing to think about.
Yeah.
That it would be very traumatic for a child, for a baby.
I think that's fair to say as well. They always say that, the baby is, first breath is taken with the first cry. And once again, I have little to no experience with any of this. But the way I view it is, it is that separation. It's like, okay, I was here, now everything's different. And I don't know about you, but when things get different, I'm gonna give a lesson on change today. I have never been one who has dealt with change very easy. I remember when I moved to Florida, and that first day after my parents left, I'm 18 years old. I'm supposed to be an adult. I'm like in my dorm room with my best friend, bawling my eyes out because I'm like, what are we doing? I'm like all this far away from home. I've never left home like this, and I didn't ever think I was. I was actually gonna go to Butler and stay in Indy. Something happened. Ended up working out. That's why I'm here, to be honest with you. Anyways, that's against the point. But I've never been one who's good with change. So I can imagine that change and that difficulty does cause a little bit of what's going on, right? So I think that's a fair point to say as well. Anything else? Any other comments on how this relates to God and his relationship with us and vice versa, our relationship as children to him?
Well, think about how desolate you would be without your relationship with God.
Yeah.
And when you do things that you know are not the right thing to do, if you have the right mindset, you feel desolate when you think about it. Even though we know that God loves us and his love doesn't change, it's our feelings that change and we don't feel worthy of that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can make an application to how lost you would feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of that feeling of being lost, yeah, you imagine your life without that love, right? And where would you be without it? I mean, nowhere close to where you can ever be with God. So that's true as well.
If you carry this over to baptism, you know, our spiritual birth. You know, when someone takes an initial step of obedience and is baptized, as soon as they come out, and as soon as you get the opportunity, what happens? You know, the entire group, majority of the group, goes up, hugs, congratulates, welcomes, and is that ritualistic? Is that, well, that's expected, so we have to do the ritual of going up and congratulating and welcoming the person? Or is it a desire built in us to build that connection just a little bit deeper?
Yeah.
One of the books I just got done reading, it talks about, you know, building experiences. And one of his points is ugly is authentic. You know, if you try and have everything, a production so clean and perfect and everything lined out, it doesn't make the impact. Because sometimes things that are not polished make a bigger impact. And when you think about the whole concept of baptism and being in front of people and being dunked in water and coming out and being soaking wet and your hair's a mess and you got makeup on, it's running, and it's not a polished process. But it starts to create deeper connections.
Yeah.
And I think that's a kind of an interesting comparison to the whole physical birth process.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that idea of baptism because I do think it's applicable and you know, because it is a new birth. It's your spiritual birth. And you talked about, you know, it's a ritual. It's what we do to just go up and congratulate them. And, you know, if that's your mindset, it's wrong. The reason that happens is because there's time to rejoice when that happens. Like when someone is born again, realizing a new path in their life, that is a time to rejoice. And it is appropriate, you know, for those congratulations. And a new bond is really, I do believe, is created. Brace?
I will say something about the ritualistic aspect of some things from what Aaron said and what you said. I know what your all's point is, and I agree with it. But here's the amazing thing. When we do the things God calls on us to do, even when we don't feel like it, sometimes the feelings follow. So even if you don't feel like it, even if it feels disingenuous or unauthentic, doing what God calls on us to do and being who God calls on us to be is never a vain exercise. God recognizes that when we do what he says, frequently the inner part of us, the feelings aspect of it, will get in line with what we're doing. And so I think that can be important to recognize too, even though what you all said is ideal and what we're aiming for and what God really wants for us. It's okay if it doesn't really feel authentic. You just recognize you ought to do it, and you do it anyway. Because frequently, God recognizes, and I recognize and experience, that the feelings will follow if we'll just do what he says.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, what you're saying is if you are not in the right mindset or not in the right headspace, but you do what you feel the Lord has commanded anyways, those feelings will indeed follow. Your mind will change.
It's at least possible.
Okay.
I mean, there were things that I did as a young husband because I recognized I was supposed to that didn't really, it wasn't really something I wanted to do. It was just, I recognized that was my responsibility as a husband. For example, I've used this example a number of times. You may not have heard it. But Dawn used to love to watch movies that made her cry. I thought that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And I didn't like those romantic, mushy-gushy Hallmark movies.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, after she died, I watched some of those movies by myself.
Yeah.
Because I had grown over time by simply doing something I knew she loved to do to enjoy them. And I, to this day, enjoy a good rom-com or mushy-gushy Hallmark movie.
Yeah.
And she's responsible for that.
Yeah.
But in some ways, God's responsible for it because I simply did what 1 Peter 3:7 commanded me to do, which is dwell with your wife with understanding. And I tried to do that to the best of my ability. And the end result was I began to enjoy it myself.
Yeah.
Is that the point? No, that's not the point. But it sure feels better in the end than just dragging yourself to some movie so your wife can cry.
Yeah.
And it's like, which that wasn't really her point either. She just enjoyed those movies.
Right.
They just happened to make her cry all the
Yeah.
time. So,
Okay.
but anyway, I mean, the point is when we do what God tells us to do, even when we don't feel like it, it generally ends up providing benefits, and our feelings will frequently get in line with the action. So God recognizes that, and we just need to trust.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Aaron?
Yeah, Brett, that's a fantastic point. We were at a wedding yesterday afternoon, and they started the wedding in a unique way. And I thought, when I first saw it, I was like, okay, this is weird. And we sung the song, Teach Me Thy Way, O Lord. It was the first thing they did at the wedding. It's like, welcome to the wedding, let's sing this song. And I thought, it was a very appropriate song. And it kind of goes back to what Bryce was talking about. When we sing, Teach Me Thy Way, O Lord, He gives us things that we need to do. And sometimes we just need to get in line and do what we say. It's almost January 1, and it's a big goal-setting time of the year. One of the things that they tell you in goal setting, from a psychology standpoint, is you write it as if it is true. I am this. I do this. And you review it and you read it, and because subconsciously you'll start doing the activities that drive you to it, if you keep them in the forefront of your mind. So if you have a scenario where this isn't part of what I do as far as loving one another, being members of one another, if you have the mindset of I am hospitable, and you do the activities, even though at first it may be uncomfortable, it does become second nature, and it becomes authentic, and it becomes, you just do it, whatever that word is, right there.
Yeah.
There's a big word that goes right there. But it's something that just becomes second nature to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's a great point.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think it all comes together. I think it's all valid in that.
That is true.
So that's good stuff. Listen, Josh, can I call you guys out for a second? We started our discussion talking about the idea of the Soviet Unions who didn't give the mother of the child who was born the child right away, and they had to wait a few days. And I just want to get your guys' thoughts, if you don't mind, on, because Angie kind of touched on this a little bit, that like when you got down to Florida, you had to wait a certain period of time before you could go to the hospital and see your child. What was that like, and then what was the first time holding him like? What was that bond? How did that, do you know what I'm asking? Okay.
So the waiting part was weird because he wasn't like ours yet.
Yeah.
We felt like he was ours,
Right.
but we didn't have any like legal rights to him. So we were trying to just be really patient and be like, you know, if he's gonna come home with us, God will make it happen. Like it'll be okay. There's a lot of prayer.
Yeah.
And then holding him for the first time was just like all of the like stress and worry that had come
Yeah.
instantly. It just, all of those emotions just disappeared, and it was just pure awe
Yeah.
at how beautiful and lovely and wonderful he was. And
Was there an instant love, like right at the first?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a love before we even met him.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, Josh, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought, and we started off our discussion with that idea, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts. Like I said, Angie. Oh, and then Erin repeated the exact same thing she said. So anyways, there's Liz and Josh's side of it, which is pretty cool. But anyways, does anybody have any other thoughts on that discussion? On the bond between a mother and a child, parents and a child, and how that relates to our relationship with God and His connection with us.
Zach,
Yes.
I think it is very interesting having adopted him now, and then also reading through the Bible about God adopting us and what that practically looks like. We've had adoption in our family forever. Mom
Yeah.
was adopted, Josh's dad was adopted. It was always kind of normal for us, but I didn't understand
Yeah.
the fact that I was so scared that there wasn't going to be a bond, that there wasn't going to be those emotions, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Whether the DNA is yours or not, and that's how God sees us. He's like, it doesn't matter. I made you.
Right.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't your official DNA father. He kind of is because he made all of us.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
But he adopted us, and he loves us just as much as any child.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this. I mean, in my mind, I think I agree. It's the exact same thing that God does view us that way, and we should view Him that way as well. Because once again, this life is not possible. Anything and everything is not possible without the guidance of our Father in that way. And so that's a good way to look at it as well. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and move on into these questions and see where we can get. So in Colossians 3, Paul listed a number of attitudes and actions we are to put off, and others we are to put on. What are we to put on above all of these things? So go ahead and turn over to Colossians chapter 3, and this is referencing verse 14. But,
Ironically, this verse is our theme for next year.
oh, is it really?
It is.
Okay.
Colossians 3:12 through 14 is our theme verse, but verse 14 has our theme in it.
Okay. Are you turning there?
I'm giving you a preview.
Does anybody turn there? Do we want to read verses 12 through 14? Go ahead, Angie.
Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with a heart of mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If someone happens to have a complaint against anyone else, just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also forgive others. And to all these virtues, add love, which is the perfect bond.
Okay, so what is it we are to put above all of these things?
What says at the very end of it, add love.
Yes.
At the very end. It kind of goes back to what I think we talked about a couple weeks ago. You can't have all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that a little bit as well going forward. But yeah, love is the direct thing that goes above all of these things. Angie, go ahead.
Did I interrupt you?
No, you're good.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about the fact that it doesn't say because you love, then add patience, or because you love, then
Right.
add all these other things. It's add love to those virtues. And it just reinforces to me the belief that I hold, which is the Bible does not talk about love as the feeling. It talks about love as the choice.
Yeah.
And you can be patient with someone while not loving them, if I just put up with it. And that's a start, maybe, but that's not adding love to your patience.
Yeah.
That's not adding the choice of, I'm going to choose to seek your well-being in this act of being patient. Or I'm going to choose to seek your well-being in my gentleness.
Yeah.
You can choose to be gentle so you don't get in trouble all the time. That can be a motivation for gentleness. But the choice of love is a motivation that, when layered onto gentleness or kindness or patience, is such a strengthening reagent. It just fortifies that so much.
Yeah. I like that idea. We talked about a lot of the emotion and feeling of love this morning, but that choice, and that is correct. So let's talk about that a little bit. What does that choice look like, and why is it so important? Andrew hit on it a little bit, but I want to hear anybody else's thoughts on what does the act of the choice of love look like, and why is that important?
I think something that came to mind is like doing for others what you'd want done for you.
Okay.
So that doesn't mean that you're always going to feel like being kind to somebody, like maybe they've not been so nice to you or something. It all goes back to how would you want somebody to treat you? And
Yeah.
That's what you did,
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Go ahead.
I think the ability to choose love is the ability to know what the other person is feeling.
Yeah.
And that I'm doing this for the other person's needs and best interest. I mean, that's the way God loves us, because he knows what we need. And that's why he loves us the way he does.
Yeah.
He doesn't just get hearts in his eyes when he looks at us because we're so cute.
Right.
He knows what we need, and that's why God's love is a love of choice.
Yeah.
And sticking with the analogy of babies, it's very, very well. Okay, I'm about to say something that I would regret. It's simple to see the needs of a child.
Yeah.
Because they express their emotions without any filter at all.
Yeah.
So you absolutely know when they are feeling pain or when they are feeling upset or needing something.
Yeah.
And so it helps to train us mortal humans, the act of seeing the needs of someone else.
Yeah. It goes back to that passage, right? We talked about it last week. We love because God first loved us. But what we can add to that is we choose to love God because he first chose to love us. And as Andrew explained, I think it's fair to say that God did have a choice in that. And he did choose to love us, and it shows. Everything around us shows that he loved us. I mean, we have proof beyond all measure. The only thing is people just choose not to see it. And people do choose to look away from it and not seek it, right? But if you really look, you'll find all the proof you need to show that God provides and God has chose to love you in every aspect of life. So that's something to remember as well. Anything else on that? Okay, let's move on to this next part. It says the word bond was used to refer to a sash or belt that held clothing together. It was also used of ligaments which hold the body together. In what sense is love our bond? We've mentioned it before this morning, but let's talk about what does that look like? What is that bond? And why is love connected to bond?
When we were developing our theme, we talked about the fact that we were a little bit leery because of the idea that we typically think of bond, we think of bondage, and we think of that from the perspective of slavery or enslavement and those kinds of things that bring a bad concept or idea to our mind. But the idea of bond here is more of the chemical aspect of the bonding of elements together forms molecules. For example, two hydrogens and an oxygen make water.
Yeah.
And so they are bonded together. Aaron brought up when we were talking about this, the concept of bonding or in electrical or electricity.
Yeah.
Bonding things. And so that's the idea here, is that we are united together. We are bound or cemented together by the love that first God has for us, but then that we have for one another. And so it's not about enslavement from from that perspective. It's about just having this chemical bond that exists between us,
Yeah.
or something akin to it.
Yeah, the idea of chemical bonds are a good explanation of this, but when these things come together, it makes this one thing. So when the bond between us and each other, and us and God, what does that one thing produce?
Harmony.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's supported by that harmony?
Love.
Love. Yeah, I mean, there's a connection, that bond between us and each other, and then us and God. That's kind of what the idea here is, and that what kind of the idea of what this bonding looks like. Like when we-
It's a lot more than you just glue.
Yeah,
You glue something together, you know, it might hold and it might not.
yeah,
Another way you can look at bond, and this is not necessarily the way this is, but when we post a bond, we guarantee that we're going to do something.
yeah,
So when it's our bond, it makes us more determined and devoted.
yeah,
It's like determination.
yeah,
You know, but you think about, bond is used in the word bond is used in so many different ways.
yeah,
The ways it's used here obviously are the bonding together. But when you think about bond as a guarantee, you know, I guarantee if you have love, then love is what will motivate you to do this, and that is your bond that guarantees this is what will happen.
yeah. Yeah, I like that you mentioned glue, but like the bond is, we have to look at it as a commitment. We have said we're going to do it, and another question I ask is this a breakable or unbreakable bond?
Unfortunately.
Okay, explain.
It's supposed to be.
Right.
I mean, because of who we are, I mean, it ends up getting broken,
Yeah.
but it is intended by God to be an unbreakable,
Yeah.
unconditional bond. And so, I mean, that's the goal. That's what we're aiming for. And again, that's more about perspective than it is anything else.
Yeah, it is.
Because it needs to be in my mind that this is a bond, that we are bonded together with God and one another in an unbreakable, unconditional bond. That's, I mean, it's permanent.
Yeah.
And in this case, from when it begins until forever, I mean, it's eternal.
Yeah. Andrew, were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was gonna say, it's the kind of bond that if it's broken, it can only be broken by the destruction of what used to be.
Yeah.
If one of the hydrogen atoms in water just decides they don't want to stick around, then what's left behind isn't a smaller molecule of water, it's no longer water. It's
Yeah.
completely destroyed that which is what it was supposed to be.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. But to recap everything was said, from God's perspective, it's an unbreakable bond. Think about it this way. God will never, ever break that bond away from you. If that bond is created and you have this relationship with Him, He's not going to be the one to break that. He is 100% committed and will never fail to stay committed. It's the other side of that causes issues. Margaret said, I think it was Margaret, we're the ones who are going to break that bond. And it goes back to what Andrew was saying, that this is a choice. Go ahead.
If we look on down, verse 15
Yeah.
gives us a good idea to let Christ rule in our lives as the perfect example, and we're to live trying to emulate Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, and honestly, if we do just that, it is an unbreakable bond. If we commit ourselves to that, which He has already committed, it will not be broken. But it definitely can be broken, unfortunately, due to the standards that we put on ourselves and due to the life that we live, I guess. But remember that, right? Love is a choice, and that choice can be dangerous because it can break what God meant not to be broken. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. I think this is a good stopping point. We only have 1 minute left, so I think this is a good stopping point because this discussion on section B can take a little while. So we'll pick up there on Wednesday. We'll finish out this class. We'll all cry together a little bit once again towards the end of it, but I'll leave about 5-10 minutes for that. But anyways, I appreciate the discussion today. I thought it was really good. And we'll pick it up on Wednesday. Thank you.